One, a trial and a threat. The skies were gray, but the courtroom felt even darker. In a closed-door chamber beneath the Washington, D.C. federal courthouse, an uneasy tension lingered like a storm about to break. Though the case was framed as a standard corporate tax inquiry, everyone inside knew it was anything but ordinary. And at the center of the storm was a name that carried weight far beyond the courtroom: Elon Musk. The doors creaked open. Elon Musk entered, flanked by silence. No cameras, no reporters, just stares, some curious, others sharp, a few quietly hostile. He wore a simple suit, but there was nothing simple about his presence. His walk wasn't that of the tech showman or Twitter provocateur. It was the walk of a man stepping into battle. Presiding over the room was the outspoken liberal judge Carlton Reeves, known for his controversial rulings in high-profile government cases. His black robes looked heavier than usual, his eyes colder. As Musk approached, Reeves's lips moved ever so slightly, almost like a whisper to himself. About time. Elon took his seat near the witness stand, ready to give testimony in what was quickly becoming a high-stakes courtroom showdown. Across the aisle, the lead prosecutor exchanged a brief glance with the judge, a glance that said more than any document could. Something was already in motion. Without looking up from his bench, Reeves let his voice carry through the room. "Mr. Musk, you're here today as a witness. This is a court of law, not a social media circus. We won't be entertaining performances." The words sliced through the air like a blade. Even the defense attorneys flinched. Musk responded with a nod, measured and cool. "And I trust justice won't be mistaken for theater, Your Honor." The jury stirred. A few heads turned. A few eyes widened. They knew instinctively that this wasn't going to be a typical hearing. This was a collision course. Power against principle, spectacle against substance. And before it was over, this courtroom would become the stage for a reckoning no one saw coming. Not even the judge. 2. The game begins. By the time the clerk called the court to order, the air had grown noticeably heavier. Even the sound of shuffling papers seemed loud against the building tension. On one side sat the Department of Justice's lead attorney, Victor Hensley, a man known for his aggressive cross-examinations and deep political ties. On the other, Elon Musk and his counsel, Naomi Calderon, a sharp former federal prosecutor who had once been Hensley's protege. Their silent glances hinted at a deeper history. Judge Reeves scanned the room with a dispassionate gaze, his expression unreadable, but simmering beneath the surface. He cleared his throat and leaned into the microphone. "We begin with testimony from Mr. Elon Musk, CEO of SpaceX, Tesla, and Neuralink," he said, emphasizing each company like a slow accusation. "Swear him in." As Musk stood, the clerk administered the oath. He raised his hand with steady confidence, eyes fixed on Reeves as if silently accepting a challenge. The moment was quiet, but not calm. "Mr. Musk," Hensley began, rising from his seat, "your companies have received billions in government contracts, subsidies, and tax incentives. Would you consider yourself indebted to the American taxpayer?" Musk didn't flinch. "I consider myself accountable to progress, not to politics." Hensley paced like a lion stalking prey. "Progress? You mean launching luxury rockets while ignoring labor disputes and safety protocols?" "Your Honor," Calderon interrupted, "is this a hearing or a smear campaign?" Reeves raised a hand, silencing her. "Let him finish. Mr. Hensley, proceed." Musk leaned forward, voice calm but resonant. "If I'm being tried for advancing human technology, then yes, I'm guilty." A murmur swept through the gallery. Reeves tapped his gavel twice, but the tremor in his knuckles didn't go unnoticed. Something about Musk's presence, or perhaps the confidence in his tone, had thrown the balance of power off kilter. The game had officially begun, and everyone in the room could feel it. Whispers began to ripple through the rows of press representatives who had been granted special access to the closed session. Even with the public barred from viewing the proceedings, selected correspondents from major outlets sat poised with notepads and muted phones. The story was already writing itself. Judge Reeves glanced at them briefly, then turned his gaze to Musk. "Mr. Musk, this courtroom will not be a platform for your opinions about science, politics, or innovation? You're here to answer specific allegations. Musk smiled faintly, tilting his head. Then perhaps the questions should be as specific as the evidence, Your Honor. The tension flared again. One of the bailiffs shifted uncomfortably by the wall. The court stenographer, barely keeping pace, glanced nervously toward the bench. The next few minutes would define not just the session, but the narrative unfolding beyond these walls. 3. Masks fall in court. Victor Hensley didn't waste another second. He strode back to the prosecution's table, retrieved a thick manila folder, and returned to the center of the courtroom like a soldier unsheathing a weapon. Let's begin with Exhibit A, he said, holding up a document. A contract amendment signed off under your authority, Mr. Musk, redirecting federal infrastructure funds to a private satellite initiative. Elon didn't blink. A project that later provided emergency communication access to over 100 remote schools in rural America, he said, at no extra cost to the taxpayer. Reeves raised an eyebrow. Are you saying that decision was purely philanthropic? I'm saying it was strategic and necessary. Hensley smirked. Strategic for your portfolio, perhaps. The government sees it differently. Naomi Calderon rose from her seat. Your Honor, we're veering into economic theory rather than legal fault. Reeves waved her down again, more forcefully this time. Sit down, counselor. In that moment, the courtroom's mask of civility began to crack. Hensley's questions grew sharper. His tone edged toward hostility, and Reeves, instead of reining him in, seemed to fan the flames. Musk, however, remained composed. With every accusation, he responded with measured explanations, referencing internal memos, audited reports, and congressional testimonies. Each answer subtly peeled back another layer of the narrative. But then came the shift. Hensley stepped closer, voice rising. Did you or did you not meet with Senator Gallagher behind closed doors to secure that redirection? Musk's jaw stiffened, just slightly. We discussed the project's potential impact, as is within legal bounds. Convenient, Hensley snapped, especially when campaign contributions followed just weeks later. Gasps echoed through the gallery. Calderon slammed her hand on the table. Objection! This is pure insinuation. Reeves didn't respond. He stared at Musk, eyes narrowed. Answer the question, Mr. Musk. And just like that, the courtroom shifted again, from inquiry to inquisition. 4. Elon's composure and first move. The room held its breath, waiting for Musk to either fold under pressure or fire back. But he did neither. Instead, he slowly reached into the leather folder in front of him and retrieved a single sheet of paper. He held it up calmly. Your Honor, this is a record of my communication with Senator Gallagher. It includes full transcripts, timestamps, and confirmation that the meeting was scheduled at the senator's request, not mine. Reeves narrowed his eyes. You're presenting this now? I anticipated bad faith assumptions, Musk replied, and came prepared to challenge them with facts. The clerk stepped forward to collect the document. Reeves gestured irritably for her to proceed. Meanwhile, Hensley crossed his arms, unconvinced. You think a single transcript clears your intentions? No, Musk said plainly, but it clarifies my actions. Intentions are your narrative, Mr. Hensley, not my burden. That landed like a punch. Several jurors glanced at each other, visibly stirred. One even scribbled something quickly on his notepad. Calderon leaned back in her chair, lips curled into the hint of a smile. But Musk wasn't done. He reached into the folder again. And here, he said, holding up another document, is a copy of the budget adjustment approved by the bipartisan Senate committee weeks prior to my meeting. Public record. Reeves held up a hand. We'll examine the validity of these submissions later. With respect, Your Honor, Musk said firmly, if the prosecution is going to imply corruption, the defense has the right to confront those implications now. The words echoed, not shouted, not emotional, but ironclad in tone. And for the first time since the trial began, Reeves didn't reply. Because for a split second, even he seemed uncertain. The silence that followed was almost surreal. Jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, aware that something had changed. Even the gallery had gone still. The court reporter paused her typing, fingers hovering just above the keys. Musk had turned the tide, not by outshouting his accuser, but by methodically dismantling the case piece by piece. Calderon seized the moment. Your Honor, we respectfully request that these documents be entered into evidence and reviewed immediately. If we're to proceed on a foundation of truth, it begins with transparency. Reeves's face twitched. He looked to Hensley, who said nothing. Then, with reluctant authority, the judge nodded. Admitted into evidence? For now. Musk gave a slight nod of acknowledgement and returned to his seat. But he didn't slouch or relax. His posture remained upright, focused. This wasn't a victory lap. It was just his opening move. And everyone in that courtroom knew it. The narrative had shifted. The hunter now looked unsure of his prey. The line between prosecution and persecution had begun to blur. And Elon Musk wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was defending something bigger, something systemic, something the courtroom itself wasn't ready to confront. 5. Truths Unleashed. The clerk barely had time to return to her seat before Musk was already placing another folder on the stand. His voice was steady, almost unnervingly calm. This, he said, tapping the folder with one finger, contains documented correspondence between key officials involved in the approval of Project Horizon, months before I was even brought into the conversation. Judge Reeves looked annoyed, but he motioned for the bailiff to retrieve the folder. Hensley didn't try to stop it. He was too busy flipping through his notes, his confidence starting to unravel. Calderon watched him like a hawk. As the documents were passed around, Musk stood again, not because he was asked to, but because the weight of the moment demanded it. The accusation that I manipulated government funding for personal gain is not only inaccurate, it's structurally impossible, he said, because the initiative was drafted, circulated, and preliminarily approved internally before my involvement. One of the jurors raised an eyebrow. Another crossed his arms, visibly reevaluating. Reeves leaned forward. Mr. Musk, this court doesn't allow grandstanding. I'm not grandstanding, Your Honor, Musk said without missing a beat. I'm correcting the record you're about to judge me with. A few gasps, a few murmurs, but the room remained riveted. Then Calderon rose and added fuel to the blaze. Your Honor, we'd also like to submit Exhibit D, internal memos between members of the Department of Energy discussing how Musk's involvement would be politically inconvenient, but ultimately necessary to ensure the project's success. Reeves froze. Hensley's mouth parted, but no words came out. The exhibit was real and damaging. The judge's gavel hit the bench harder than before. Recess, 15 minutes. But no one moved, because what had just been presented wasn't just a defense, it was a revelation, a reversal, and everyone in the room knew that when they returned, this wouldn't be the same trial. It would be something much bigger. A beat of silence followed the judge's words, but still, no one budged. The tension in the room had crystallized. A few jurors glanced at one another, clearly shaken by the magnitude of the evidence. Some reached for their water glasses, hands trembling slightly. The gallery remained frozen, absorbing the shift like an unexpected storm front. Even the bailiffs hesitated. One of them, stationed near the side doors, exchanged a look with a court officer, as if asking, "Should we actually escort anyone out?" Calderon leaned in toward Musk, her voice barely a whisper. "We've cracked something open. The question is, how deep does it go?" Musk didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the judge, who sat still, hands clenched around the gavel as if it were the last thing tethering him to control. Because in that moment, control had clearly shifted. The courtroom had turned. The story had changed. And the man everyone expected to be on defense was now holding the pieces of a puzzle no one wanted to see completed. Whatever came next, it wouldn't just challenge the narrative, it would dismantle it. 6. The judge breaks down. When the court reconvened 15 minutes later, the energy in the room had transformed. What had once been a neatly controlled judicial proceeding now felt like a precariously stacked tower, one tremor away from collapse. All eyes turned to Judge Reeves as he entered from his chambers, slower than before. His robe looked rumpled, his expression strained. He took his seat and adjusted the microphone, but his voice didn't come immediately. Instead, he shuffled papers, adjusted his glasses, and stared blankly at the bench as if trying to remember what authority felt like. "Let's continue," he finally said, but his words didn't carry the same weight. Hensley stood, but his usual confidence was gone. He glanced toward Reeves, hoping for support, but the judge avoided his gaze. We'd like to revisit the intent behind the Project Horizon amendments," he said. Calderon stood immediately. "Your Honor, we've already provided full documentation of the approval timeline, financials, and interagency memos. If Mr. Hensley wishes to speculate, we're prepared to submit further evidence, including communications with your own clerk." That last sentence hit like a bullet. Reeves snapped his head up. "Counselor, watch yourself." But his voice cracked. Calderon didn't flinch. "Your Honor, we believe the court deserves transparency, especially when it involves a judge who has direct ties to agencies implicated in biased distribution of federal contracts." Reeves's gavel struck the bench, but his hand trembled. "You're treading on dangerous ground, Ms. Calderon." Musk remained seated, silent. He didn't need to speak anymore. The documents did it for him. Then from the back of the courtroom, a low murmur spread. One of the jurors whispered to another. The court reporter paused again. Even the bailiff leaned in slightly. The tension wasn't just palpable now. It was volatile. Reeves stood. "This court is adjourned until tomorrow morning." But his robe caught on the corner of the bench. He stumbled slightly, just enough for everyone to see that the man behind the title was unraveling. He left the courtroom without another word, and behind him the silence was louder than ever. 7. Truth wins, power falls. The next morning, the courthouse steps were swarmed by reporters, their microphones pointed at the air, hoping to catch the first drop of fallout. Headlines were already circulating online. Musk dismantles federal case, judge under fire, whistleblower evidence rocks trial, and judicial bias exposed in tech showdown. Inside, the atmosphere was starkly different from the day before. Security had doubled. Jurors arrived quietly. No one spoke unless they had to. The weight of what was now at stake hung heavy over every bench, every step. Even the courtroom walls seemed to absorb the tension, the echoes of yesterday's unraveling still lingering like static in the air. The press gallery had filled early, their eyes trained on every twitch and turn, waiting for something, anything that would confirm what they already suspected. This trial was never just about Elon Musk. Judge Reeves entered last. This time, there was no attempt at confidence. His robe was straight, but his eyes were bloodshot. He took his seat like a man awaiting sentence, not delivering one. For the first time since the trial began, he looked smaller, diminished not by height or voice, but by the erosion of credibility. Before proceedings could resume, Calderon rose. "Your Honor, the defense moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Musk on grounds of prosecutorial misconduct, judicial conflict of interest, and systemic bias." Hensley tried to object, but Reeves raised a weary hand. "Motion granted." Gasps. Stunned silence. Then murmurs rippled through the room like aftershocks. Musk remained still. Calderon gently touched his shoulder, but he didn't move. Not yet. Reeves continued. "Furthermore, this court will refer itself to the Ethics Committee for review. A special counsel will be appointed to investigate the integrity of these proceedings." He paused just long enough to let the gravity sink in. "And I will be recusing myself from any future involvement in federal technology litigation pending that review." With that, the gavel came down one final time. Outside, the media exploded. Inside, the courtroom remained still for a moment longer. Musk finally stood. He turned to the jury, not out of necessity, but out of principle. "I didn't come here to win," he said, voice quiet but resolute. "I came here because I believe truth still matters, even when it makes people uncomfortable, especially then." And with that, he walked out, not as a tech mogul or a billionaire, but as a man who reminded a room full of people that power, unchecked, eventually collapses under the weight of its own illusion. The final verdict wasn't just legal, it was moral, and it had been delivered loud and clear. In the weeks that followed, multiple investigations were launched. Reeves resigned quietly. Hensley vanished from public view. The DOJ issued a rare internal statement acknowledging procedural inconsistencies. But more importantly, a message had been sent, not from Musk, but from the system itself. It could still self-correct if enough people forced it to look in the mirror.